The new school felt loud in ways that had nothing to do with sound. Lockers slammed, shoes scraped across the floor, and voices echoed through long hallways. But the noise that mattered most was the feeling of being watched. The quiet new girl felt it the moment she walked through the front doors. She kept her eyes forward and her shoulders relaxed, moving with calm steps as if she had been there before, even though everything around her was unfamiliar. She had transferred in the middle of the school year, which always drew attention. People noticed new faces right away, especially when they didn't speak much. She wore simple clothes, nothing flashy, nothing that asked for notice. Her hair was neatly tied back, and her backpack looked worn, like it had traveled many places. She moved through the building as if she knew where she was going, even when she had to check the room numbers twice. In the first few days, most students barely talked to her. Some glanced at her in class, others whispered when she passed by. She sat near the back of the room, close to the wall, choosing seats that made her feel grounded. When teachers called her name during roll call, she answered softly and clearly, then went back to listening. She paid attention, took notes, and followed instructions without trouble. What no one knew was that silence had always been part of her life. It wasn't fear. It was focus. She had learned early on that speaking less helped her observe more. At every new place she had lived, she watched first. She studied how people moved, how they reacted, and how quickly things could change. At lunch, she usually sat alone or at the end of a table where no one complained. She ate slowly, her movements controlled, her posture straight. Sometimes she read, sometimes she just watched the room. She noticed who laughed the loudest, who seemed nervous, and who tried too hard to look confident. She noticed which teachers looked tired and which ones truly cared. There was a pattern to every school, and this one was no different. In the hallways between classes, groups formed naturally. Some students walked with friends, others with phones in their hands, and some alone like her. She never rushed. Even when the bell rang, she kept her pace steady. Running only created panic, and panic led to mistakes. She had learned that lesson long ago. A few students started to notice her calm. To some, it looked like shyness. To others, it looked like weakness. A few laughed quietly when she passed by. Someone once bumped into her shoulder on purpose, then kept walking. She didn't react. She simply adjusted her balance and continued forward. That lack of reaction stood out more than anger ever would. Teachers described her as polite and well-behaved. She followed rules and never caused problems. When asked questions, she answered with short but thoughtful replies. She didn't volunteer often, but when she did speak, her words were clear and confident. Confused some teachers. Quiet students were usually nervous. She wasn't. At home, her evenings were structured but simple. Homework first, dinner with family, a short conversation about the day, then quiet time. Her room was neat with very little on the walls. No posters, no distractions. Just space. Space helped her breathe. There were things in her life that didn't come with her to school. Trophies stayed packed away. Medals were kept in a small box, rarely opened. Old photos from competitions around the world were stored on a phone she barely used. Those things belonged to another part of her life, one that didn't need attention here. This school was supposed to be normal, but normal rarely stayed that way. By the second week, certain eyes followed her more closely. One student in particular seemed to enjoy standing a little too close when she walked by. The comments were low and meant to be heard only by her. Things like, "Watch where you're going," or "Don't be so slow." Nothing loud enough for teachers to notice. Nothing clear enough to report. She heard every word. Still, she said nothing. Her calm response, or lack of one, made things worse. People who wanted reactions didn't like silence. Silence made them uncomfortable. It made them feel unseen, unimportant. And for someone who thrived on attention, that feeling was dangerous. One afternoon, as she walked down the hallway after class, the crowd grew thicker. Students rushed to lockers, laughing and shouting. She moved carefully, aware of the narrow space. A sudden shove from behind made her stumble forward. Her books slipped from her hands and scattered across the floor. For a moment, the hallway froze. She caught herself before falling, placing one foot forward, steadying her breath. She looked down at the books, then calmly bent to pick them up. Her face showed no fear, no anger, just control. The student responsible laughed and walked away, satisfied, surrounded by a few others who followed along. No apology, no consequences, at least not yet. A few nearby students watched in silence. Some felt uncomfortable. Some felt relieved it wasn't them. One or two felt something else they couldn't explain. Confusion, maybe, or respect. She finished collecting her things and stood up straight. Her hands didn't shake. Her breathing stayed even. Anyone looking closely would have noticed how quickly she had recovered, how naturally her body responded. But no one was looking that closely. She walked to her next class as if nothing had happened. Inside, though, something shifted. Not anger, not fear. Awareness. She understood the pattern now. She had seen it before in other places, other schools, other cities. It always started small. Words, looks, small physical acts meant to test boundaries. The real danger wasn't the shove itself. It was what came next. That evening, she didn't mention the incident at dinner. She focused on her meal and listened as her family talked about work and schedules. Later, alone in her room, she stretched quietly, moving with practiced ease. Her muscles remembered things her mind didn't need to think about. She reminded herself why she was here. This place didn't know her story, and that was fine. She didn't need it to. She had learned that real strength worked best when it stayed invisible. As she lay in bed that night, she replayed the hallway moment once, then let it go. Tomorrow would bring new tests, new choices. She would handle them the same way she always had. Calm, silent, ready, and completely underestimated. The next morning felt different, even though nothing had changed on the surface. The same buses lined up outside the school. The same bell rang. The same crowd pushed through the doors. But for the quiet girl, the building felt smaller, tighter, like the walls were paying attention now. She walked in with the same calm pace, her backpack resting evenly on her shoulders. Her face showed no sign of worry. Still, she noticed more than before. The way people paused when she passed. The way whispers followed a second longer than usual. News traveled fast in schools, even when it came without words. In class, she focused on her work as always. She answered when spoken to and stayed silent otherwise. A few students tried to catch her eye, maybe expecting something different after what happened in the hallway the day before. She gave them nothing. Silence was still her choice. Between classes, the hallways became the real test. She felt it again, that presence behind her, that sense of being watched. She didn't turn around. Turning around too soon could look like fear. She kept walking, steady and balanced. Someone brushed past her shoulder harder than necessary. Not enough to cause trouble, just enough to send a message. She adjusted her step without slowing down. Anyone watching closely would have seen how naturally she corrected her balance, how her body responded before her mind did. At her locker, she opened the door and took out her books. She could feel someone standing too close behind her. The space felt crowded, even though there was room to move. A low laugh followed. "Move faster," a voice muttered. She closed her locker gently and turned just enough to step away. Still no reaction. Still no words. That seemed to bother them more than anything. At lunch, the room buzzed with energy. A group nearby laughed loudly, throwing glances in her direction. She stayed focused on her food, her posture calm, her hands steady. A tray slid slightly closer to her, nudged on purpose. She simply moved her own tray back to its place. Across the room, a few students noticed. Some felt uncomfortable watching it happen. One student stood as if about to say something, then sat back down. Fear had a way of keeping people quiet. She finished her lunch and stood up. As she walked away, she heard someone whisper, "Why doesn't she do anything?" The answer was simple, but no one there would understand it yet. She had learned that reacting too soon changed everything. After school, she took her time leaving the building. She didn't rush to the exit with the crowd. Instead, she waited until the hallways thinned. Outside, the air felt lighter. She breathed deeply and walked toward home, her steps relaxed. At home, she changed into comfortable clothes and stretched slowly. Each movement was smooth and controlled, like a routine her body knew by heart. She didn't think about the hallway or the comments. She focused on her breathing, on staying present. Her family noticed nothing unusual. She smiled softly when asked about school and said it was fine. That was the truth, in a way. It was fine. It was familiar. The next day, things escalated. Started with words again. Louder this time. Still just quiet enough to avoid attention from teachers. The tone was sharper, more confident. The goal was clear now. They wanted a reaction. Any reaction. She gave none. That afternoon, as she walked down the longest hallway in the building, the crowd pressed in from both sides. Lockers slammed. Laughter echoed. She felt a hand push against her back, stronger than before. Not enough to knock her down, but enough to cross a line. She took one step forward, steadying herself, then kept walking. The laughter behind her grew. A teacher appeared at the end of the hall, and the noise faded quickly. The pushing stopped. Smiles disappeared. Everyone went back to pretending nothing had happened. But something had changed. She could feel it. People were watching her now, waiting to see if she would break. Waiting to see if she would finally react. Some wanted drama. Some wanted justice. Some just wanted entertainment. She wanted peace. In class, she noticed her hands resting flat on the desk, relaxed. Her breathing stayed slow. She listened to the lesson, but her awareness stayed wide. She understood the situation clearly now. This wasn't going to stop on its own. After school, she stayed back to talk to a teacher. Not to complain. Not to accuse. Just to ask about transferring lockers to a quieter hallway. The teacher nodded and said they would look into it. No promises. Just words. That night, she lay awake longer than usual. She stared at the ceiling, thinking about timing. About choice. About control. She remembered being much younger. Standing on a mat under bright lights. Surrounded by people watching her every move. Back then, she had learned that staying calm under pressure was the real victory. That reacting emotionally only gave power away. School pressure was different, but the lesson was the same. The next morning, she noticed something else. Respect from a few. Curiosity from many. Frustration from one. That frustration grew. By the end of the week, the tension was heavy enough to feel. Every hallway pass felt like walking through a test she hadn't agreed to take. Every silence made someone else louder. Then came the shove. Not a light push this time. Not something that could be ignored. It happened fast, in front of others, near the lockers. Her shoulder hit the metal with a dull sound. The impact echoed louder than any laugh. Books hit the floor. The hallway froze again. She didn't fall. She didn't shout. She didn't strike back. She straightened slowly, picking up her books one by one. Her face stayed calm, but her eyes lifted briefly, just long enough for the message to land. This had gone far enough. A teacher rushed over, voices rose, and the crowd broke apart. Questions were asked. Explanations were given. She spoke calmly when spoken to, choosing her words carefully. The one who shoved her looked surprised. Not by the teacher's presence, but by her reaction. Or rather, the lack of one. As she walked away with her books held close, whispers followed her again. But they sounded different this time. Less confident. More uncertain. She knew what was coming next. Not a fight. A choice. And whatever happened, it would be on her terms. The days after the hallway shove moved slowly, like the air itself had thickened. Everyone knew something had happened, but no one talked about it out loud. Looks were exchanged. Whispers followed footsteps. The quiet girl felt it the moment she entered the building each morning. Attention clung to her now, even when she tried to avoid it. She stayed the same. She walked with steady steps. She kept her shoulders relaxed. She spoke only when needed. Inside, though, her awareness sharpened. She noticed patterns more clearly than before. Who stood where? Who watched too closely? Who backed away when teachers came near? The one who had shoved her seemed different now. Louder in some moments, quieter in others. confidence mixed with irritation. The lack of reaction had not brought victory. It had created uncertainty, and uncertainty made people careless. In class, she focused on her work. A paper was passed back with a small note written at the top. Good job. She allowed herself a small breath of relief. Schoolwork had always been her anchor. It reminded her that control still existed. Between classes, students made space for her without realizing it. Not out of respect exactly, more out of curiosity. They didn't know what to expect anymore. She was no longer just the quiet new girl. She was the quiet new girl who didn't break. At lunch, she noticed fewer comments. A few stares. A few nervous laughs from across the room. She ate slowly, her movements calm as ever. One student sat at the same table, not speaking, just sharing space. That small act meant more than words. After school, she took a longer route home. Not to avoid anyone, but to think. The street was quieter, lined with trees and parked cars. Each step helped her sort through her thoughts. She understood the situation clearly now. Silence alone would not stop this. Ignoring it had reached its limit. The next step required balance. Too much reaction could make things worse. Too little could invite more pressure. She needed timing. The next day it happened again. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Just a foot placed in her path as she walked down the hallway. She stumbled slightly, catching herself before falling. Laughter followed. Low, sharp. She turned this time. Not fast. Not angry. Just enough to face them. The hallway seemed to pause. No one spoke. Her eyes met theirs, steady and clear. There was no threat in her face. No challenge. Just awareness. Just presence. For a brief moment, something shifted. Then a teacher's voice cut through the silence, asking what was going on. Everyone moved at once. Excuses were made. The crowd broke apart. She walked away again, but the message had been delivered. That evening, she didn't stretch as usual. Instead, she sat quietly on her bed, hands resting on her knees. She closed her eyes and breathed slowly. She thought about restraint, about responsibility, about how easily strength could become something else if not handled carefully. She remembered being taught that skill meant nothing without control. That walking away was often the hardest move. That real discipline showed itself long before action ever did. The next morning, the tension returned heavier than before. The bully seemed determined now. Determined to regain control, to force a reaction, to prove something to everyone watching. Words were thrown carelessly. Shoulders bumped harder. Space was invaded again and again. She felt it building. During the longest hallway change of the day, the crowd pressed in tighter than usual. Lockers lined both sides. There was nowhere to step aside. She moved carefully, eyes forward. Then came the shove. It was sudden and forceful, sending her books flying across the floor. The sound echoed down the hallway. Gasps followed. Someone laughed, then quickly stopped. She hit the lockers but stayed on her feet. For a split second, instinct rose. Muscle memory surged. Her body knew exactly what to do. She stopped it. She took a slow breath instead. She knelt down and picked up her books one by one. Her hands were steady, her movements precise. When she stood, she faced the one who had shoved her. Her voice was calm when she finally spoke. "Don't do that again." The words were quiet, but they carried weight. The hallway was silent now. A teacher rushed over, asking questions, separating people, restoring order. She answered clearly and simply. No accusations. No drama. Just facts. The bully tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out wrong. Forced. Uncertain. They were sent in opposite directions. The crowd scattered, but the energy stayed behind, heavy and unsettled. Later that day, she was called into the office. She sat calmly in the chair, hands folded, posture straight. She explained what had happened without raising her voice or changing her tone. The adults listened closely this time. Questions were asked. Notes were taken. Something was finally being taken seriously. As she left the office, a few students watched her with wide eyes. Not fear, not admiration, something closer to understanding. The bully passed by later, surrounded by fewer people than before. The laughter was gone, replaced by silence and tension. She felt it then. The shift. This wasn't over yet. But the balance had changed. That night, she stretched again, slow and controlled. Her body relaxed as she moved. Her breathing stayed even. She felt grounded. She knew what came next would test more than her patience. It would test her judgment. She was ready, not because she wanted confrontation, but because she knew who she was. And soon everyone else would too. The next few days felt heavier than before. Not louder, not more dramatic, just heavier. The kind of weight that sat in the chest and made every hallway feel longer. The quiet girl sensed it the moment she stepped into the building. People were watching her differently now. Not just with curiosity, but with expectation. She stayed calm. She always did. In class, she listened closely, taking notes, answering when asked. Her voice stayed steady. Her hands didn't shake. On the outside, nothing had changed. On the inside, she was alert, fully present. Word had spread that the office was involved. That alone shifted the balance. The bully no longer moved with the same confidence. There were fewer laughs, fewer people standing nearby. Still, the looks remained. Sharp, challenging, like someone daring her to slip. At lunch, she sat at her usual place. A few students chose nearby tables instead of avoiding her. No one spoke directly to her, but the distance had closed. Silence no longer felt empty, felt respectful. She noticed the bully watching from across the room, jaw tight, eyes narrowed. The attention felt heavy, but she didn't look away. She didn't stare either. She simply existed, calm and unmoved. After lunch, the longest hallway awaited. The one lined with lockers that echoed every sound. She walked into it with steady steps, her posture relaxed, her breathing slow. The crowd was thinner than usual. That should have been a warning. She felt the shift behind her before it happened. The air changed. Footsteps sped up. Space closed in. Then the shove came, harder than before. She hit the lockers, the metal cold against her shoulder. Her books scattered across the floor, pages sliding, covers spinning. The sound rang out sharp and sudden. For a brief moment, instinct surged again. Her body reacted before her mind finished the thought. She adjusted her stance, protected her balance, and stopped herself from falling. Everything she had trained for was there, waiting. She didn't use it. She took a breath. The hallway froze. Someone gasped. Someone whispered her name. Someone pulled out a phone, then hesitated. She bent down and picked up her books slowly, one by one, calm, controlled. When she stood, she faced the bully fully this time. Her voice was quiet, but clear. Stop. Just one word. It landed harder than shouting ever could. The bully laughed at first, but it faded quickly. The sound didn't carry. It didn't convince anyone. A teacher appeared at the far end of the hallway, moving quickly. Another followed. Voices rose. Questions came fast. She stepped back as instructed, holding her books close. She answered calmly when spoken to. She didn't point fingers. She didn't exaggerate. She told the truth and nothing more. The bully's story shifted. Words stumbled. Confidence cracked. They were taken to the office again. This time the room felt different. Serious. Quiet. Papers were spread across the desk. Notes from before were reviewed. The adults listened carefully. She sat straight, hands folded, eyes calm. When asked if she felt threatened, she answered honestly. Yes. One word again. That was enough. The adults exchanged looks. Decisions were made. Consequences were discussed. She was asked if there was anything else she wanted to add. She paused. Then she said, I just want to feel safe here. The words were simple, real. They stayed in the room long after she left. When she walked back into the hallway, the building felt quieter. Not empty, just settled. Like something had finally been acknowledged. The rest of the day passed slowly. People glanced at her, then looked away. No comments, no shoves, no laughter. After school, she stepped outside and felt the cool air fill her lungs. For the first time in days, her shoulders relaxed fully. At home that evening, she spoke a little more than usual. Not about details, just about how tired she felt. Her family listened without pressing. They understood silence better than anyone. Later, alone in her room, she stretched again. Her movements flowed easily, practiced and precise. Each motion reminded her of discipline, of patience, of control. She thought about how close things had come to crossing a line she didn't want to cross. How easy it would have been to react. How much harder it was to hold back. The next morning, she walked into school with the same calm pace. But something was different. People moved aside for her. Not out of fear, out of respect. The bully avoided her completely now. Eyes down, shoulders tense. The power had shifted not through force, but through restraint. Teachers checked in quietly. A nod. A simple, "How are you doing?" She answered politely and kept moving. By the end of the day, the tension that once filled the hallways had thinned. Not gone, but lighter. Manageable. She knew this was leading somewhere. Questions would be asked. Truths would come out. And soon, the reason she had always stayed so calm would no longer remain a secret. For now, she walked forward. Steady. Silent. Strong. And ready for what came next. The school felt calmer, but calm did not mean finished. The quiet girl sensed it as soon as she walked through the doors that morning. There was a different kind of attention now. Not the sharp kind that followed her before, but a curious one. People were waiting for something. She moved the same way she always had. Steady steps. Relaxed shoulders. Calm breath. Teachers greeted her more warmly. A simple smile. A quiet check-in. Nothing dramatic, but enough to show they were paying attention now. She appreciated that. Feeling seen mattered more than being defended. In the hallway, students made space without being told. Lockers opened and closed softly as she passed. Conversations paused, then continued. The tension that once followed her had thinned into awareness. She reached her locker and began organizing her books. Hands steady, movements precise. Someone nearby cleared their throat, as if wanting to speak, then didn't. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. Later that morning, a counselor asked her to come to the office. The walk there felt longer than usual. Not because she was afraid, but because she knew this was the moment things would change. Inside the office, the atmosphere was serious but respectful. Papers were laid out neatly. Notes had been taken. The counselor spoke gently, explaining that the situation had been reviewed carefully. Patterns had been noticed. Witnesses had spoken. She listened quietly. Then came the question. Is there anything about you that might help us understand how you handled this situation so calmly? She paused. This was the choice she had been preparing for. She took a breath and spoke in a steady voice. She explained that discipline had been part of her life for many years. That control mattered more to her than reaction. That she had learned early how important it was to stay calm under pressure. She didn't boast. She didn't exaggerate. When the counselor asked more directly, she nodded and shared the truth. She was a black belt, not just trained, a world-level competitor. The room went quiet. The counselor looked surprised, then thoughtful. Questions followed, careful and respectful. She answered them simply. Where she had trained. How long? How often she competed. Why she never talked about it. Her answer was honest. Because it's not who I am here, she said. It's just something I do. The counselor nodded slowly. That afternoon, the bully was called in separately. Consequences were explained clearly. Boundaries were set. There was no shouting, no public scene, just firm decisions. By the end of the day, word had spread. Not loudly, not with drama, but enough. People whispered in disbelief. Some were impressed. Some felt embarrassed for how quickly they had judged her. A few felt relief, knowing the situation was finally over. The bully avoided her completely now. Not out of fear but awareness. The kind that came too late. In the days that followed, life slowly returned to normal. She walked the hallways without interruption. She sat in class without stares. She ate lunch without tension pressing on her shoulders. A few students smiled at her now. One asked if the seat next to her was taken. She nodded. They talked about simple things. Homework, teachers, music. Nothing else needed to be said. At home, her family noticed the change in her posture. How her shoulders seemed lighter. How her breath came easier. She smiled more, even if just a little. One evening, she took out the small box she kept hidden away. Inside were medals worn smooth by time. She looked at them briefly, then closed the box again. They had done their job. They had shaped her. They didn't need to define her. Back at school, the story slowly faded into memory. New drama replaced old. Attention shifted elsewhere. But something important remained. The culture had changed. Teachers were more alert. Students spoke up sooner. Silence no longer meant weakness in that building. And she remained quiet. Not because she was afraid, but because she was at peace. On the last day of the term, she walked down the same hallway where it had all started. Lockers reflected the light. Voices echoed softly. She passed the spot where her books had once scattered across the floor. She didn't stop. She didn't need to. Her strength had never been about what she could do. It had always been about what she chose not to do. As she stepped outside into the open air, the sun warming her face, she felt something settle deep inside her. Belonging. Not because she had proven herself, but because she had stayed true to who she was. Quiet, disciplined, unbreakable, and finally understood.